I get closer to the subject that I announced at the beginning, but I warn you, I guess, in the beginning when I says that we will proceed in 3 steps. So we have done 2 already, so we are 1 more to do about the 2 painters I want to speak about now, David Milne and Goodridge Roberts. The idea was, of course, to make a contradistinction between them and what I showed previously. The idea that I was suggesting at the end of the period before, that when you get painters beginning to express the idea that anything could be a good subject matter for painting, then you get out of this sublime attitude, if you want. And the reason is simple to understand, because sublime is very much linked to certain type of beauty and certain type of aesthetic experiment. It's not anything that could be sublime. It has to be restrained to a certain theme and a certain type of attitude, like I tried to explain. So the moment this is no more an issue, then you get people expressing like Hopper did, and like Milne, you will see, does it also quite clearly, and in a way Roberts maybe didn't say it in words, but he did it, and which is more important. Then suddenly you see that the subject matter, or what they choose to paint, or what they decide, like Milne will say, being a good place to paint, become in a way indifferent. And then the challenge of the painter then, it is that even with this kind of nondescript place, I could make a beautiful thing, I could make a painting. Then the challenge is in the form, is in the color, is in the composition of the painting, in what we could call all the plastic language of the painting. And indeed, it's a way toward also abstraction, if you want, but very different from the way that start with Friedrich and will end up with Rothko. In a way, the Rothko exemplified well the fact that you have a northern romantic tradition who didn't pass through Paris, who have touched people like from Scandinavia, for instance, Munch and artists like that, who will touch people in Holland, Mondrian and Van Gogh, and in Germany, but who have not go through Paris. And the French, of course, always think that they have the most clear mind and the more distinct mind, since Descartes, they repeat that, of course. And, as a French Canadian, I feel very, my cousin français, right? Sometimes go too well, but anyway. So I have a certain distance with this. So I can see the aspect a little bit ridiculous of that, because indeed, the painter I will mention now are English-speaking, and they were, in a way, very close to this clarity and to this distinctness. But it's a fact that you will have in Paris, let's say, this tradition who go from the Impressionists, the Fauvists, and then the Cubists, of course, in which the attitude will not be to express idea, but to explore all the aspect of the painting as a medium as such. And you will have then a kind of reflective element who will be introduced in painting, where the painting will begin to speak about painting itself. That makes it, of course, more difficult to deal with, because more distant from a common interest, in a way, because you have to deal more with interests who are specifically the interests of the painters. And in that sense, you have another tradition there that could be illustrated very well by David Milne and Roberts. In this 2 versions of the same subject matter, if you want, it's called Flooded Prospect Shaft. So what happened, Milne tell a story. You know that with Milne we have fantastic documentation, because he had a friend who was called Mr. Clark, to which for at least 30 years he wrote letters about his paintings, sometimes with little drawings, And all this fantastic material written by pencil like that, really not well presented, are in the archives at the National Library in Ottawa and could be consulted after it have been deposited there. And it's absolutely passionnant because you see the painter thinking and saying how he got to the subject matter that he's treating in this painting or the other. And for instance, in a letter to this James Clark, by the way, Clark is written here in kind of weird way with an E at the end, C-L-A-R-K-A. And he says, it will take time for me to switch from the open sky of Palgrave. Okay, what happened? He moved from place to place in Canada, in Ontario, if you want. He was before in a place called Palgrave, and then he went to a 6 miles lake, and he says, okay, it will take me time to adjust from one place to the other, but look what he says after, to the close material of the bush, because now he's going deeper in the forest. This is a fine chance to test my theory that the change of environment means nothing once you get used to it. That anything is good painting material when you get to know it. Even a flooded shaft of an old mine, like you see here. So in the foreground, you have this shaft of the mine covered by water, and that's why it makes a reflection, let's say, of the trees. But then the picture becomes so intricate in a way that it's almost like an abstract painting. So if you don't know the subject matter, if you don't have the title, you can see it just as a kind of very well organized, very interesting type of painting, and the subject matter, in a way, seems to be a little bit trivial. And in Milne text, in this letter, he speaks of my theory, meaning that it's really something conscious, that, again, this idea that you could move from one place to the other after a certain period of adjustment, any place becomes a place where you could paint beautifully, a little bit like in the text of Hopper I was quoting just before. He says, I had the feeling that I would like to go on down the 1/4 of a mile of dried up pond, painting every section of snag and stick in it. 100 pictures of just the same material. To make 100 pictures with the same little piece of land, let's say a dry pond with some trees sticking out, and with this, changing the angle, making one step further, and having for 100 painting to do. This is inconceivable for a man like Friedrich. There's one way to see the tempest and things like that. You cannot begin. Okay, you can make many versions of it, but in a way, you cannot just, by changing a little bit your point of view, you will create a lot of painting. The point of it is in the everything, like Milne said. Not merely things you will usually see, but things so simple that you ordinarily would not think of them as subject material for painting. And in the case of this, he writes to the director of the National Gallery at the time was Mr. McCurry. Milne have better, let's say, relation with McCurry than with Eric Brown. Eric Brown was the director of the National Gallery, was behind the group of 7 that was buying their stuff a lot and was encouraging them. Eric Brown was an Englishman from England, and he thought, well, this is typically Canadian, this is what I should encourage. And this type of painting for him looked too Parisian, too close to Paris and all that, and he liked it less. But McCarthy, after, was more open to him, and he described these paintings to him. He says, I see there iron, silver, gold, arsenic, sulfur, molasses. Really, the molasses there is there in a way, this black stuff that you see there. And he said, it looks like a collision between Winsor and Newton and coal mine. Good for painting. Winsor and Newton, you know what it is. Of course, the students here use this stuff. It's a painting material, rather good quality, I would say also. And so this is good for painting. You see this kind of collision between. But you see then even the material used by the painter is part of the challenge there. The fact that he used this color is also, and indeed, the description here of the painting are just with material and just with colors. When you say iron, silver, gold, arsenic, sulfur, and molasses, you are referring to the picture just by element who could be called formal. Not that you should take formal just in the sense of form, but any aspect who is not dealing with the content, with the subject matter of the painting. This is what we call form. Any aspect like color, like composition, like rhythm, like movement, like shapes, of course, also, format and all this are the formal aspect of the painting. When, en plus, you have a kind of reflection on these aspects, you could have a formalist attitude among painters, when they are very conscious of that their painting is about form only. In the case of Milne, and as you will see Roberts also, there is a figuration, there is something to look at, and indeed it's probably less absolute than in a completely formalist type of approach. But nevertheless, you have certainly, if you see it as a balance with an equilibrium, now the onus goes toward form and less toward subject matter. Another very famous painting of Milne, it is this one who's called Painting Place. Again, I think the title is interesting. Number 3 of 1930, who is at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa, of course. And again, he described to Clark, again, this type of how he finds the subject matter of this type. Almost like if he described it as if you walk in nature and then suddenly a landscape struck your eyes and it became a place to paint. Like he says, I wander around gradually, warming up until something definitively connects with the painting chapter you are on at the time. There could be even an unconscious element here which is interesting because we know through Milne letters and memoirs and all that he lived in a country who looks, in his childhood, who looks a little bit like what he depicts here. So this connection that is made suddenly with a landscape rather than this with one, you could have unconscious element that plays in the choice, as if a reminiscence of your childhood, a landscape that you used to like or looks like something that you have lived before. And this is absolutely open to that. It's almost as if there was no preconceived idea of what the landscape will be. And you will see the same idea also expressed by Roberts, that so much that when Roberts was sent as a military artist, he was very miserable there because he had subject matter imposed on him. See? When you are a military artist, of course, you are supposed to represent battles and to represent action on the front and everything. And he could do it properly because he was a fantastic drawer and he liked drawings and all that. But the fact that he could not just respond to something that interested him in the first right make his painting less interesting. And in fact, Roberts always spoke of this period as a kind of negative one. He didn't want to show these war paintings. And contrary, you will see to Milne, in the contrary, who have saved them and have succeeded to do something with them. Okay, when you try to understand how Milne arrived to this idea of the imposition of form, you just need a little bit of information about the way he grew up and the way he was formed. Milne had the chance, let's say, to go to New York early. In 1903, he was already in New York, and he went to the Art Student League. The Art Student League have been one of the school of art of very important in New York for many, many years. Even Jackson Pollock was there. And it was a long school with a long history of some good period with their teachers, some less good anyway. But it was certainly a place very exciting to be in. And there, Milne had the possibility also in New York to open himself to what was happening in modern art. Okay, at the time, what was in was what we call the Ashcan school. Mind you, we're not going too far. Huh? Ashcan school means what it means. These painters were beginning to paint a little bit the life in the street of New York, and since people were used always to see unicorns and angels and nymph in painting, they find it horrible, so they call it Ashcan. Huh? But okay, people like Robert Henry, William Glackens, John Sloan were the ultimate modernist at the time. But when you think of Milne starting, why he went to New York? Because he took some correspondence courses from his little place in Ontario, and he wanted to be a commercial artist. He wanted to draw cartoons and illustration in newspaper. And then he arrived to Art Student League, get exposed a little bit to this Ashcan school, to these new trends. It's before, of course, the Armory show, all that. And he began to have a real success in New York. Milne was the only Canadian painter who was represented in the Armory show, and you know how important was this this big exhibition confronting partly European avant-garde and at the time what was the American avant-garde. And it's there in particular that Duchamp had his painting was called the Nude Descending a Staircase. And so some funny guy says it's a staircase descending a nude, because it's a very cubistic type. Anyway, it was a lot of scandal around this, but the Armory show is certainly 1913, one of very important event in the history of American painting. And David Milne have there I think 2 or 3 watercolor and 1 oil painting. So he was, let's say, really not only taking advantage of the surrounding where he was, but also really participating. When he decided to move to Canada, then I don't know if he regretted it, but for 30 years nobody spoke about him. You have from 1917 to 1937, no, comment ça fait ça? 20 ans? 20 years, I'm sorry. For 20 years, not an article on him, nothing. It's a big contrast to what he knew before in New York. And the first one who spoke about him is Donald Buchanan. Maybe certain of you knew him. He was a very delightful man at the National Gallery. And he published an article in all places in the Lethbridge Progress. I don't know what, a kind of little newspaper in the end of Canada. In Lethbridge, where is it? In Alberta? Well, and so that was the beginning of his fame here, if you want. Troisième ville en Alberta? Okay, I'm sorry. This is the Québécois ignorant, le coureur des bois. Who doesn't know about Lethbridge? The Lethbridge Herald, by the way. It was not the Lethbridge Progress. Okay. And you see, I will show you just, even if it's not a landscape, but to give you an idea of the previous picture of David Milne, when he was in New York, he did a series of 2 pictures. One was called Black, this one, and another was called Red, and with the same type of theme. You see, it's an interior, of course, with a lady reading a newspaper, you see on the right, and a reflection in a mirror, and then the window opening outside, and on the foreground, a table. And the fact that he titled his work Black instead of Interior is already interesting, because instead of stressing the subject matter, he stressed one formal element, the color, how it's painted. And indeed, it's not too easy to read at first sight. Let's say, it takes some time to see the personage because she's black on a black background. Everything is treated in a kind of flat shape, if you want, and not how do you say, modelé? No feeling of 3-dimension space and thing. Everything is flatly painted. And quite decorative also, and close to Matisse, if you want, in terms of feeling, in terms of the way the painting is created. So David Milne start with this, get in New York this type of style of his own, and then could grow up from there. I was mentioning before apropos Roberts, the war military, the military artist, how Roberts was unhappy with this. In Milne, which is surprising, it is that he succeeded to maintain his own style, even with subject matter who could be, in a way, less interesting. I thank my wife to have signaled that to me, because I was absolutely unaware of this military period in David Milne development, but she saw an exhibition that I didn't see, and it's always good to be a couple, to have some information coming from the others like this. So thank you, Brinari. And this is called Shell Hole and Wire at the Old German Line on Vimy Ridge. I repeat, okay, shell hole and wire. Shell hole, you see them here and there, and the wire in the foreground, the kind of barbed wire. At the whole German line at Vimy, of course, Milne was involved as a war artist during the First World War, in 1914, 1918, in that period. And what is striking, if you compare with Roberts, it is that he succeeded to maintain his style and not to change his outlook. And Roberts thought, in the contrary, that he had to make more realistic picture to please the whatever authority that were there, and then, of course, was dissatisfied with this production and didn't want to show it and to be associated with it. The other thing that Milne did also a lot, it is engravings. He have made wonderful dry points. You know more or less the technique of this. It's you take a plaque of metal and you cover it with some varnish, and then with a needle, in a way, you scratch the form that you want to print. Then you put oil paint on it, and I would say the oil goes in the places where you scratched before, and with a rag you remove the too much paint that there is, and then you could print like this. And one of the phenomena of this system, if you want, it create kind of soft line. It's not too hard, like for instance if you were dealing with woodcut or with lino cuts and things where the line is very hard and very and in fact in a lino cut or a woodcut, the line that you will print is in relief. There is in the contrary, it's kind of is something engraved, something cut in the plaque on which you work. And then not only the line is softer, but you have the phenomenon of what we call barbs like this, like little fuzzy line around the main line that is there. And mine wanted to have this effect, especially in these two engravings, because he wanted to show early in the morning with a kind of fog effect. So it's reflection on ponds also. And then when painters are dealing with reflection, you could be sure that there is a kind of rapport to their own work, I would say. Because after all, you could say painting itself is a reflection of reality. So then you include a mirror, in a way, which is the lake here, who reflects the landscape, except certain pieces that you see here and there. And on the right side, the circle that you see are fishes coming to the surface and creating this little round. When a trout comes just to breathe or to look for a fly or something, you will make just this perfect circle with a little dot in the middle. And so, again, it will stress this kind of horizontal surface. And if you think of it, the fact that the mirror here is horizontal make it quite close to the situation of the engraver when he works. The engraver doesn't work on the wall. He works on a table. He has his metal plaque in front of him, and he scratch it, and then he print it. If you want, the normal space of drawing and engraving is an horizontal space. And painting could be done on an easel, could be done vertically. So in a way, indeed, he is making a reflection about painting, but in a very specific way about the situation of an engraver working on horizontal things. You could read the very interesting ideas about that in a book of Michael Fried who's called like this, Writing and Disfiguration, and in which he speaks of Thomas Eakins, an American artist who represented, for instance, his father as a calligrapher. And of course, the calligraphy, again, is something that you do on an horizontal surface. So there is, when painters deal with the mirror and situate the mirror in the horizontal plane, in a way they are reflecting to their very craft, to their métier, to the way it's done on a surface when you make an engraving. So it's not only a representation of something, but it's also a reflection on the process that will end up with this painting. With Roberts, we will have, again, the same type of attitude and I would say this kind of distance that they will take with a group of 7. Roberts have almost parallel education, let's say, than to Milne, except that he was 2 years in 1923 and to 25 in the School of Fine Arts of Montreal, l'École des Beaux-Arts. And I learned that recently, and it interested me tremendously because this is the very beginning of the École des Beaux-Arts. That means that he was in the same class than Borduas, because Borduas also started in 1923 when the school was created by Athanase David here in Montreal. Roberts came from the Maritime province, but he had family here, and he was sent here to study in this École des Beaux-Arts. Mind you, you should not imagine him as a poor Anglophone drowned in a sea of Québécois, because at the time, mind you, there was a little bit of that, but at the time you had 450 students, half of it was English speaking. Why? Because the school of this museum was closed at the time. So normally the English speaking student would have come here in the school of the museum, but then it was closed. So, and the pamphlet announcing the École des Beaux-Arts were in both languages. So I could imagine from New Brunswick, you see where he was, he thought that, okay, this is okay. And Roberts probably could not communicate at the time with Borduas, because I'm sure Borduas didn't say a word of English at the time. Even, for instance, all the correspondence of Borduas, there's not a single letter written in English. Even when he writes to Martha Jackson and to friends in the United States, he always write in French. And he could receive a letter in English, but he was not certainly speaking English. Not much, maybe toward the end of his life a little bit more, but certainly not at l'École des Beaux-Arts. And Roberts tells the story that he, at the École des Beaux-Arts, he tried to pass for the guy who was very quiet and will just nod and have nice expression to show that he understands something when somebody was speaking in French with him. See? You just go like this. Yeah. You could survive, I guess, probably 6 months like this. I don't know, but you could. So they were. His teacher were different type of people. Well, Edmond Dionnet was a Frenchman, academic painter, rather good, and very probably. Very close to the academic tradition. You see drawing, then plasters, and then, see, because you start with imitating plaster because you have no color there, you just deal with values, and then finally, at the end, you put some color on your take. You have Mayas, and Robert Mayas, this is a more interesting man. He was teaching them decorative art. Because at the beginning, the school wanted to be a school in which the student could find jobs. And decorative art was taught as being a possible outlet. When the École du Meuble will be created, it will be a big source of conflict between the two schools, because they will pretend that they have the same aim. So Robert Mayas was a Frenchman, like Dionnet, and he was teaching decorative art. And finally, they have Charles Maillard, who was not the director of the school at the time, like he will be in 1925, but was a teacher of painting and will be la bête noire of Bordua. Maillard was like, I will speak of him a little bit more about Cosgrove because you will see his mix with his life. But this was the school that Roberts knew at the beginning. He quit the school in 25 and went to the Art Student League too. So he went also in United States, and then he had fantastic teachers. You have John Sloan and Max Weber, well, the most known of his teacher. Sloan was giving them ideas how to make quick sketch. Like you could get the gist of something if you paint rapidly. And Roberts would be always interested by this idea and trying even to transpose it to landscape. So, is it possible to make a landscape in one session, even oil? And this, of course, you need an immense control on your ability, and a one-shot landscape is not easy to do. You have to predict what will be. It was easier to do in watercolor, and indeed Roberts will make many watercolor in which you can draw some lines, you see, and create some what we call reserve, a place where you don't touch with color, and you reserve for the end, and then you could add, for instance, the clouds and things at the end of your aquarelle. But with the oil, it's much more complicated because it's not a medium that dries fast. You have to really predict how it will get constructed to do it in one shot. But this idea came from the teaching of Sloan. And Weber will teach him, in a way, to build a picture through color. To start with color, not to give so much importance to drawing like in the academic tradition. And indeed, you could say that Roberts constructs his picture, his landscape, through color. Like here, for instance, you can read different plane in the picture, even if it seems to be a kind of little place somewhere in the Eastern Township or in the Laurentian. It's always difficult, more or less, to choose where it is. Mind you, this one is better known. It's end of summer, Saint-Jovite. Saint-Jovite is in the Laurentian. It is a place that was rented to him by Lyman. Lyman had a chalet there, or it's kind of villa, and he rented it to Roberts 2 summers, and he went there and he liked it, and he painted these landscape in this region. So the way you could say that the construction of it is done through color, as if the drawing itself is not very important. You could really add one plane after the other and construct the whole painting. And this is interesting because then again, form is attained, if you want, shapes even, is attained through color, through real means of painters, and not with idea and things like that. And Roberts always insisted that what impressed him, it's like this, it's to go in the country and then suddenly be catched by a landscape, a little bit like Milne was saying, as if, again, there's a kind of an unconscious, non-preconceived idea that could attach yourself to one aspect or the other of the landscape. He said, you see, he described this place on a hilltop just behind the cottage. I sat day after day looking over a panorama view of field and forest and river and constantly discovered new material for my picture. It's almost a quotation of Milne that I was giving you just before. It's almost the same idea. I was at the same spot, and I could find material to paint every day by changing slightly the angle or deciding to eliminate this element and to take this other one and to create a painting one after the other that way. Let's see, for instance, sometimes the paintings are done with very simple subject matter. Like here, the Laurentian Road, okay, a road in the Laurentians, if you want, in the mountain in the north of Montreal, number 2, 1939, this thing, and in which you have another things that was interesting, in which, let's see, flat expanse of color are not treated as it should if you want to respect perspective. Normally, for instance, when you paint a sky, the upper part will be darker, and the closer you get to the horizon, you will be more bright. You will be almost white at the end. Here, you have a kind of solid sky blue, and even the feeling you get, it is the sky is painted after the subject. After that, the trees were painted, and as if a kind of remplissage, you see, that you finish with the painting, and you had the sky like this, like, in a way, a surface of pure color that is added there. The road also have no diminution it's the same color all over. You are close to us, or you are deep in the structure of the painting inside, and it's the same colors applied. Again, as if the very simple construction, almost Cézannesque, I would say, make it clear enough and formal enough, let's say, to speak by itself. You don't need all these tricks of perspective and all that. Just the pure color, the pure opposition of color, even the absence of this modulation of maybe in some trees you do have this feeling of a kind of volume in which some parts are darker and then some parts are lighter. But some of them are painted almost flat of these trees. This little painting has been used in another painting of Roberts, and I think it's interesting to put them in parallel. You see, what you see on the wall is this Laurentian road. And the painting that I show you on the right, nude on a red cloth, or I would say a red mistress in a way. It's his wife at the time. And you have a little mirror near her and a kind of flower bouquet. And you could see also, it's not so easy, but on the right side here, there was an opening that had been overpainted after. And indeed, there is a photography of this painting in which you see Roberts working on it, and before it's really finished, in which you see a really dark rectangle there. And this kind of intervention there is interesting because Roberts says once that the wall behind the figure has something almost as important as the thing itself. That the wall behind the figure should be treated with as much care as the painting, as let's say, the model here. And here, of course, it's the idea of a kind of non-academic model at all. See, it's done in this Saint-Jovite little chalet of Lyman, so not in a surrounding that will suggest anything specific. The expression of the model also is neutral. You cannot. She's just there to be painted. There's no other relation than that. A little bit like in a Manet picture, let's say. And so at the same moment that he tried to make this landscape so simple and just structured with color, you could say he treated the model about the same way. A little bit like Cézanne was doing that also, when he was shouting to his wife, "Ne bougez pas plus qu'une pomme." Don't move more than an apple. See? Cézanne was not a nice man, of course, but meaning that he treated even his wife like an objet, like something that you could paint this or that. See? And I think the confrontation of the two, the fact that he included his own landscape in the picture, is interesting in that sense also. It is as if all this is more or less treated at the same level. At the same look, another, the sand pit of 1942, again, when I was mentioning a picture made by color, where the drawing is almost inexistent in a way, just the way it's constructed with color, I think here it's a good example also. And even the fact that the trees are painted almost with the same type of value, the same type of intensity, in fact, make it even difficult to detach one from the other. It makes a kind of mass of color in the back like this, and it's succeeded to make with again, the minimal subject matter, a sand pit, something which is interesting and exciting to look at. Of course, I could go on and showing many pictures, but I think what is important is to try to see what is the importance of these painters in Canadian art. Both of them, in fact, have come back to this idea that painting is not done just with ideas. if you, and Bordeaux will say the same thing also, you don't paint just with the literary idea, like he used to say. And it is probably one of the traps of the sublime that I was speaking before. The idea are exciting, the idea are profound, are the big values. But if you don't have a man like Friedrich to deal with this, you could end up with a very bad painting. I think it's Gide who says that the hell is paved with good intention. The fact that even with good idea, if you don't have this feeling as a painter, you cannot achieve something. And indeed, Milne and Roberts, and in a way, more minor way with Cosgrove, you have painters who have really stressed this fact that subject matter is not everything. You have also to have this feeling. This painting was done in 1943. And contrary to the other one that I show you, seems to be seen from above and from far, you have there the impression that the painter is below, is lower in the hill. He doesn't have anymore this huge vista on a fantastic landscape who's developing in front of him, like, for instance, the solemn land of MacDonald I was showing to you. Now you are in the hill and you are looking at it, and in certain I think it's a watercolor. There you could see even the thing he's looking at seems to be very simple, very little place, let's say, not too much developed. And then even the very position of the painter in the landscape, I would say, become more humble and more interested by whatever is around him and doesn't need anymore this grandiose scheme and this. But as I told you, this was not easy to do in a way because there was each time that modern art advanced, it made also some sacrifice. You want to stress the form, but then you have to be less interested in ideas. There's always this kind of give and take in the development of modern art, and it can be also live, I would say, with pain by the painter themselves, because they realize more than we do what is lost and what is the step are taken by some of their confrères when they decided, for instance, to get rid of all this romantic tradition and all this sublime and this opposition between sublime and beautiful. But on the other hand, the people like Roberts and Milne who did it are, to me, I see them like courageous people who are ready to really sacrifice a lot of aspect of the older painting to propose us something new and something interesting. Okay, thank you. And, that's enough, I guess.